Good afternoon, everybody. Good to be back. And I think we're going to have an interesting afternoon, deal with some interesting subjects, and particularly the chronic miasms. I want this to be the start of a sequence that we can follow. Obviously, we're going to start with Psora and then move through the chronic miasms to the combined miasms of tuberculosis and carcinosis. For many, these are theoretical subjects which are not necessarily brought into practical application. But believe me, they are the backbone of good practice, good chronic practice, and also helps you in the dealing with acute conditions and the inexplicable failures that we so often have, even when prescribing to the absolute best of our ability, with sincerity, taking the full case, prescribing to the best of our wits, and then finding that we are not getting the results that we anticipate, that we would wish to get. And I'm sure there must be in this audience everyone, in fact, who would resonate to what I've just said. It happens to all of us. The difficult case, what can we do? It shouldn't be such a problem, actually, if we're considering what can we do. Say we're in a really difficult situation where we can't make head or tail of a case. Nonetheless, we should be able to make a miasmatic diagnosis. And if we can make a miasmatic diagnosis, we have the signature remedies of each of the miasms before us. And we know that during Hahnemann's Paris years, so many of his cases he commenced with sulfur. He prescribed sulfur, and it was like trout fishing. You throw in your sulfur and you reel it in and see what is it going to bring out of the matrix of the patient. Is there, you're going to excite something with the sulfur? It is so basic to all of us. We come from sulfur. Sulfur is related to the volcanic period of planetary evolution. It was the substance which, even to this day, is so involved in volcanic activity. Hence, the formative forces of the planet all are related to sulfur. A basic remedy. So we would prescribe that, and from that, of course, do a reassessment of the patient, watching the totality of symptoms that would emerge. Often in the work that we do, it is like selecting a remedy to the best of your ability, with sincerity, with as much information as you can possibly glean from the patient, dealing with a patient who doesn't necessarily know themselves. How much do they know about themselves? What is the totality of symptoms? Can one actually speak of a totality of symptoms? Isn't it another holy grail that's there as something idyllic that we would love to aspire to, just as we would the simillimum? But so often, the simillimum is a myth, something which one would wish would just drop into your lap. But certainly, when you go playing golf, you do not anticipate a hole-in-one at every hole, or any hole for that matter. And if in a lifetime it should happen, fantastic. It can happen. And you can get the simillimum. In other words, a remedy which cleaves its way through the patient's constitution right to bedrock, and does everything that you could wish of a remedy. In fact, Massimo Mangileavore speaks of a remedy that would cut through the acutes and the chronics, a remedy that you'll find is of use for a person's acute problems and also their chronic problems. It is a holy grail. Keep it there, because it can be a wish. And sometimes it may happen that a person, for instance, could be a lachesis so through and through that lachesis does everything for them. And I think that's a good example, because lachesis has that kind of ambiance and power. It is a very wide and deep-acting remedy. But nonetheless, your patient will fall and hurt themselves and need arnica as well as the lachesis. And other things happen to people, so you'll need more than just a single remedy for any person. When we prescribe on the totality, we're not talking about the totality, because who knows what that totality is? The huge injunction standing over Apollo's shrine is know thyself, or unto thine own self be true. And then it is sure that you will be untrue to no one. You'll be false to no man. I'm paraphrasing Shakespeare here. Know thyself, but do our patients know themselves sufficiently to give us the totality of symptoms? It cannot be. And when we first sit down with a patient, it's an initiatory experience. It is a dialogue that's going to be established, a learning to know one another at a very deep level. It's an inviting forth of intimate information, private information. You need to go into hallowed halls known only to the patient themselves, possibly even always avoided by the patient. Areas of deeply suppressed emotion, rejected aspects of themselves, which they've never really entertained, that they've denied unconsciously, that are hidden away in a shadow aspect of themselves. Now, to get a ticket into that sacred area takes time. It takes months. It takes years, doesn't it? So forget totality of symptoms. Forget simillimum as well. The remedies, the symptoms that we can lay our hands on is the totality. And this is where prescribing from a miasmatic point of view or a signature remedy related to a miasm can so often assist where there are difficult problems. It is like shaking an apple tree. We have certainly picked up a lot of apples from under the tree that are lying there, and that is our available symptomatics, emotionally and physically. And then we put in a remedy which is searching, and it is along lines of miasmatic identification that one can work so nicely. You shake that tree, apples fall from the tree, and these can be garnered. Gather these together, and now you've got a broader base on which to prescribe. So never should one be perplexed to such a point, what do I do? What remedy can I prescribe? If you sense that there is a psoric predominance in a patient, then Psorinum and sulfur are there for you as a starting point, without a doubt. And because Psora is so basic to all our constitutions, all disease is based upon Psora. We'll go into what that means in a moment. Because of that, you must get some reaction. What are you looking for particularly? Well, symptoms which come out onto the surface, certainly. The sulfur has an externalizing effect. Psorinum has a hugely externalizing effect. If we think of sulfur as an archetype, we're thinking the archetype of the volcano. Now, what is volcanic activity other than a working out from great depths onto the surface of material which is accumulated within the constitution, if we think of a human state? It's a deep condition and is coming out onto the surface. Lovely. Terrific. These days, it would seem in most civilized countries that psychosis has taken over as the predominant miasm. I think we'll recognize that in our Johannesburg society, Cape Town society, a society of escapism in which wine, women, and song becomes very important in enduring the rat race of life. The Psoric rat race of life, enduring the escapism of the Friday evening. Isn't that right? The escape into TV, into soft soap operas, these stories that we vicariously enjoy instead of the pains of our own lives, and which assuage some of the pain that we have and help us. Very important. Alcohol. Now more and more, of course, recreational drugs. Recreational drugs. And standing at the center of that, cannabis indicus as a wonderful remedy and also, of course, a wonderful antidote to many of the things that transpire. And that's just a little wedge, a little opening of the door that leads you into ecstasy and cocaine and other habits. This is all about psychosis. We need to know these miasms. You need to know them like the back of your hand. You need to have a feel for them in the energy of the patient to feel it, and you shouldn't make a mistake. And in being able to diagnose and apprehend it, you can prescribe for it and bring about reaction. And that reaction is so valuable to you. There are many ways into the labyrinth of the human psyche. The human psyche is a living entity. It is not something which is so cut and dry that there is only one remedy to start a particular case. If you think of the young person entering into homeopathic practice with this plethora of remedies that one has, and then you're facing also clinical diagnosis that you've got to make, and then you've got to try and get this totality of symptoms, and the remedy must be the simillimum. It must be so accurate. Isn't it an impossible task? Aren't you daunted before you even start? It is scary. It is extremely scary, and it doesn't need to be. There are many ways into the labyrinth. If I pick up the human psyche and look at it, it is a multifaceted diamond. It is exquisite. It's beautiful. With all its flaws and with all its problems, it is still an exquisite structure. I look at it, and I evaluate it, and I look for prescribing format or template, something that I can recognize. If I hand it to my astute colleague, a homeopath, and we're working on a very deep level, depth homeopathy, and he will pick up that diamond and assess it, I am not astonished if he sees a facet that I'm not concentrating on. And if he said, I think this patient should have this remedy, whereas I said, I think we should start off with this remedy. And then we hand it to George Vatulkas, and we hand it to Massimo Magliavore, and we hand it to Rajan, and they may come up with different ideas as well. And that, to an allopathic doctor, would indicate that homeopathy is a whole lot of junk and nonsense. And it isn't. That is absolutely sound. There are different ways into the labyrinth. It depends on how you're looking at the patient and what the patient has divulged to you. They will divulge to you certain things which they will not divulge to a colleague. And likewise, to a colleague, not necessarily what they would divulge to you. There are different emphases which come out. Don't worry. Prescribe to the best of your ability, and you start to move inwards. And the sequence of remedies then starts to come out at you. I've mentioned it before, and I mention it again. No patient should be under chronic treatment without a dream book beside them, maybe a dream catcher hanging up in the room. That's not woo-woo, that's not airy-fairy either. It is a symbolic gesture. Knock and it will be opened. Ask and it will be answered. My dream catcher. I want to dream, please. It's a gesture. So don't think of it as something woo-woo or fantasy. It is not. It's a request, and it is in symbolic form. This body that I'm now gesticulating with and grimacing with and expressing myself inadequately with because I have to use symbols of words, nonetheless, it is in itself a symbol, isn't it? It is not David. David is something far deeper, far higher. But this body is fairly adequate. Our remedies are the same. They're symbols of a greater reality that stands behind them. If we can understand that. And the patient, the body, is a symbol of something that is far higher and far greater. So, we must go into the depths and dreams. We must create dream dialogue. You want the patient's higher consciousness to give to us clues and cues as far as the road forward is concerned. You invoke dreams. No good having a dream book if you haven't got a dream pen as well. So please, a dream pen. And the dream pen may also be this inanimate object lying next to you in the bed that you can stick a rib into, at least an elbow into the ribs, and say, can I tell you of this wow dream I've just had? Because dreams need to be captured and they need to be held. They're very much like steam out of a kettle. they are ethereal. And unless you've experienced them, they will dissipate and you will lose their magic. And you want to hold on, above all, you want to hold on to the feeling of it. So put those in place. Secondly, miasmatic analysis, and we've looked at Psora, Psora sulfur. We come to psychosis, Thuya. Absolutely. A hugely deep-acting remedy, which is going to create reaction. I'm talking about cases here where we're in difficulties. Please understand. Syphilis. Hopefully we're not going to get too many of these guys around, but if you're in northern Iraq, there are a lot of them, aren't there? If we think of the islands, the areas of great conflict, of inhumanity, that is now genocide, torture, murder, and sacrificial sabotage. Just think of what is going on in the world today. There's a huge amount of syphilis. So syphilis and mercury and syphilinum are there for your use. And the aggravation at night, isn't it? Aggravation at night particularly that we look at. Great remedies also there to stir mercury. Mercury was to the ancients Hermes. And always think of the Greek counterparts. Don't think of the Roman gods and goddesses. And know your mythology. Know what it means to speak of Hermes. Hermes was the messenger of the gods. And the messenger of gods could pass through different dimensions. Now, anyone working with psychological medicine, as we do, has to pass through dimensions. And mercury is a wonderful help. Sulfur and mercury, they stand together. Mercury is a nasty sulfur. Learn to study remedies in tandem. When you know remedies well, they fit together like a hand in a glove. Never study sulfur without studying mercury. They must be studied together. So important, little tips that help immensely, because in studying them in tandem, you will understand both of them better and understand how they interact with one another. Messenger of the gods, always accompanied by dogs. Lac caninum, another archetype. So immediately you link that in, and we know lac can attacks the throat, tonsils, just like mercury does. So very, very closely linked. And where it's going left, right, doesn't merc iod rub, merc iod flav do exactly the same? Two aspects of the mercurial nature that give you that left, right reaction. Dogs with them, lac caninum, so closely linked, a major remedy, also to lead you, a guide dog. If you're blind, and how many homeopaths are blind? Hey. If we haven't learned to accept the fact that we're so often blind, then we can't develop and we can't enlarge our capacity to cure. You know, it is important to know these limitations are self-induced. They're so important. I was speaking to Peter this morning about the proficiency that is required in homeopathic prescribing and how we can look at the tennis players at Rafa and at Novak and marvel at the wonderful expertise, the geometrical precision of their tennis playing. Redlining. We need to be able to redline. Why can they redline and be successful and lucky? Because they've been there and they're doing it constantly. Now, if you want to be successful homeopaths, that's what you need to do. You're constantly tilling your garden. You're constantly watering it. You're constantly putting in new plants. Make sure that those that you put in are big, iconic plants. Don't play around with earwigs and hedgehogs and goldfish. You know, look at the good, big, muscular remedies. That's where success lies. Not these secondary remedies, which everybody's looking at. Strange, rare, and peculiar remedies. Strange, rare, and peculiar symptoms? Yes, please. Yes, please. Central remedies. Central remedy. Here, just a little interjection. If we think of the marvelous homeopathy that was practiced by Tyler, practiced by Clark, practiced by Kent, practiced by Cowperthwaite, practiced by Farrington. Hey, these giants of homeopathic history. My father, who died in 1972, before the plethora of new remedies which we now have. And were they doing good work? They were doing brilliant work. Wonderful work. And many of the remedies that we newly have acquired were lacking to them. There are many ways into the labyrinth. But the big thing is to know your polychrests like the back of your hand. You need to know them so well that they're part of you. There is a disturbing capacity in these modern times for people to want new and different, constantly, and thinking that they can do better by having more. More means more choices. More choices means more difficulty and head-scratching. It means diluting of rubrics with extra remedies, which in fact changes the weight of remedies within that rubric. Difficulties. You don't need more remedies, you need better knowledge of the remedies you've got. Adding to that, iconic substances like scorpion, like diamond, like many of the Jeremy Sher remedies that have latterly come to hand, which are so brilliant, and he's chosen them with such care. This is different. You know when a remedy's really got something to it. Lack remedies. Let me just diversify a little bit, but lack remedies. How many lack remedies are there on planet Earth? To practice homeopathy efficiently, must we have every one of those lack remedies at our disposal? Do we feel incompetent if we don't have as much and as much and more and more? Is that possible? You see, use one's knowledge. What remedies must we have in lack form? And it is a useful little exercise here and now to think what must be the most important lack remedy that there is. And what would that be? I'm hard of hearing, so you'll have to shout at me. Absolutely, spot on. Lac humanum, lac humanum, lac maternum, same, must be. It has to be. It carries with it all human suffering from way back, right back to Eve, let's say. Forget Adam, Eve. Adam was the one who made Eve suffer. But right back to Eve. That is in lac humanum. What then? And this is knowledge that you need. What is the second most important lack remedy that you need to know? Lateral thinking, knowledge, scientific knowledge, homeopathic knowledge. What must be the second one? If we had to give a hierarchy, there are always hierarchies. What would be the second most important? Now, you immediately look at domesticated animals because they must be an animal that has walked our path, that has shared our struggles, and that has stood beside us. What remedy is it? And you're going to be wrong. Man's best friend must be lac caninum. The cow, no.
The horse.
No.
Dolphin.
Not many people have got a dolphin in their backyard. Now, anthropology gives you the answer. The goat. But also, your knowledge of milk gives you the answer. If you couldn't have mother's milk, what milk would you want to give to your child? Above all, which is the one that is so similar that your child will thrive on it? Goat. Lac caprinum. Lac caprinum is your vital remedy that you need to look at and know. And what is the big factor in lac caprinum? Fear of being attacked. It's a huge symptom, big fear of being attacked. How many of us feel that? Here in Johannesburg, probably in South Africa, but everywhere. And certainly if you're in Iraq at the moment, up north there, fear of being attacked. Then comes lac ovis, the sheep. Those two were domesticated long before the cat and the dog. And so likewise, the cow now comes along, and the horse comes along, and then only lac caninum and lac felinum. The natural sequence of evolution gives to you the priorities that you're looking at, gives to you the remedies in the sequence they come out, and how you need to study them and look at them, and see how that relationship between the human being and his animal evolved. It's a useful way of looking at things. Lactoprinum is a very important remedy. Again, you need to know these remedies extremely well. The dog, once we start on the dog, of course, then one realizes the importance of it. And there are goddesses and gods who always had dogs with them. Hermes was one. Asclepius was another. He was the son of Apollo, and Apollo is Aurum, god of gold. Golden arrow, golden bow, Apollo. So you link then the dog to Aurum. Aurum is gold. Aurum is Apollo. And when you study Apollo in mythology, you relate it to your understanding of Aurum. And you find you're fleshing out a picture and enriching that picture immensely. Another one, a goddess who always had dogs with her, was Diana. But don't think of Diana, think of Artemis. Right? She who was a maiden that was out in nature. She is the huntress. And she has a silver bow with silver arrows. So we're looking at argentum, not argentum nit, but argentum metallicum. Dogs, laccaninum, closely related. They're closely related in mythology, and you can bet your life, if that be so, they're closely related homeopathically as well. You see, myths, what are myths? They're collective dreams. And your dream is a personal myth. So that dream that the patient has is in mythological form. It is in code. It's encoded. And it comes from the higher centers, from your higher being, your higher self. The homeopathic remedy dips into the psyche, passes through the personal unconscious, into the collective unconscious. There, according to its resonance, its frequency, its picture, it arouses a corresponding image from the archetypal ocean and brings it up from those depths. And as it moves outwards, it is erasing its own shape and form as it comes out onto the surface in its full power. Can you imagine something like that? Isn't that exactly what we're doing with our homeopathic potency when we give it? We're creating a frequency reaction from the collective unconscious, which is archetypally chosen according to the frequency we've put in, and the image of the archetype arises, and in doing so, erases the similar picture on the surface as a curative response. When the warrior emerges ferrum from that archetypal matrix, it erases the wounded soldier on the surface. Think of it in that way. This imagery of the psyche is very important. That's what I wanted to introduce to you last year. Probably we haven't completed it yet, but I think it's important at this juncture that we move forward with some basic homeopathic understanding of the miasms so we can link these things together. But don't leave your inquisitiveness, your curiosity regarding the structures of the psyche behind you. Look at Jung, look at Freud. Understand what I mean when I say the id and the power of the id, which is the vital force, which is made up of the aggressive aspects of survival in this world. And that is made up of fright, flight, freeze, adrenal cortex, adrenal medulla. Think of it, first chakra, color red. Link these bits of knowledge into your homeopathic knowledge so you can take it forward as a whole science. Homeopathy doesn't stand alone. It's linked to chakra theory. It is linked to the understanding of analytical psychology, of psychoanalysis. These are all things which enrich your understanding of homeopathy and can take you forward as a powerful practitioner. And that's what we want. And please revisit your fantasy world. The fantasy world, that is the real world, big R, behind the very dour reality of the small r, that world that we're confronted with that actually eventually makes you put down the paper, turn off the news. What is there for you? But misery. Seriously, misery. And you know it's going to go on and on. And you don't get disheartened by that, because the only reality you're worried about is the patient sitting across the desk from you. And like for myself, the only thing that's important in my life now is my audience, my wonderful audience that enables me to participate in a homeopathic play. It's wonderful. It's really so good.